2 secondes. Quel message vous l'envoyez au conseil d'administration d'Air Canada concernant les propos de son PDG?
Encore une fois, la semaine dernière, les propos de M. Rousseau étaient inacceptables. Et puis, je comprends que la communauté québécoise ainsi que les francophones à l'extérieur du Québec étaient vraiment déçus. J'espère réellement que le conseil d'administration va évaluer la situation. Et puis, on a attendu parler de leur nouvelle.
Est-ce que vous avez communiqué avec Air Canada, la haute direction, M. Rousseau lui-même ou le conseil d'administration?
Mon bureau a été en contact avec Air Canada.
Qu'est-ce que vous lui avez dit?
Encore une fois, mon bureau a été en contact avec eux pour leur partager que réellement, on était très déçus et des commentaires des propos de M. Rousseau. Et puis qu'on espère que le conseil d'administration va prendre des actions.
Mais ça veut dire quoi prendre des actions? Ça veut dire quoi que le CA prenne des actions? Est-ce que M. Rousseau peut rester?
Je pense que c'est une question que vous devez demander au conseil d'administration. C'est finalement eux qui ont la charge. Et puis j'ai bien hâte de voir qu'est-ce qui va être.
Mais vous pensez quoi? Vous dites qu'il faut que le CA prenne des actions. Ça veut dire quoi?
Encore une fois, je pense que c'est une question finalement à demander au conseil d'administration à Air Canada.
Mais quel message?
Avez-vous fait des demandes spécifiques?
Mr. Beech, how are you?
I miss you guys.
Good to see you. How are the kids?
They're fantastic.
Good.
It's been nice to be able to be home and spend some time with them.
Great. How was the election for you? Did you have any issues you want to talk about in caucus about, or do you think it was a good, smooth run to re-elect?
The election was good. I have a great opportunity to reconnect with the community and make sure that our priorities are here. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want to talk about childcare today, housing, pharmacare. I think there's a lot of issues that are going to be high on the radar.
Deal with the NDP. Deal with the NDP. Do you think that there should be a deal with the NDP to keep the government alive? Or?
I think that minority government is an opportunity to work with all parties in the House, and I wouldn't be opposed to a deal at all.
This has been too long. Do you get a caucus? First caucus meeting for your party here. This has been too long since the election.
Well, there's a lot of work to do after an election. You got to pack it up. You got to pick a cabinet. You got to get government business organized, and of course we had the G20 and COP. So I'm very excited to be here today and to get back to work on the Hill. But we've been working every day since the election ended, so it hasn't been quiet by any means.
And what would be the advantage for you, the Liberals, to have an agreement with the NDP to make the government last longer?
Well, I guess it depends on what kind of deal is going to be struck, but maybe I don't know whether I'm getting some details on that today or not, so stay tuned, I guess.
And a deal breaker for you?
Pardon?
Is there a deal breaker for you?
Well, I'm sure there are, but I don't know what they are.
So basically, there's a lot of conversations happening, but the MPs have not been appraised of what's going on.
I don't know how many MPs are involved exactly on the discussions, but I'm not certain. But I certainly am very positive about the ability to get a deal and work on a lot of positive things for all Canadians. And whether that's with the NDP or anybody else, we'll wait and see.
Okay, merci, Monsieur.
I don't know. I just think that they will have opinions.
Minister, just again to the camera.
Yeah.
On the NDP, do you think there should be a deal with the NDP?
I think that this is very important for Caucus to have a conversation if they want to. Yeah.
And are you open to it? Are you comfortable with it? Are you open to it?
I am going to hear from Caucus.
Do you think there should be a deal with the NDP? Do you think there should be a deal with the NDP? They're usually a big fight for you in Scarborough.
I think we'll be I think we'll be working very hard with all the parties to get things done. Thank you.
Yeah. So right about here. So deal with the NDP. Should there be a deal?
Look, we're having conversations with each of the parties to make sure this Parliament works. The Prime Minister has spoken with each of the other party leaders. I've had an opportunity to speak with my counterparts. Are still waiting on who the Conservative House Leader is going to be. But we're committed to make this Parliament work and having constructive conversations, and we're doing that with all parties.
Être capable de faire ça.
Plus formel que ça avec le NPD, est-ce que c'est ça que vous êtes en train de dire?
En effet, maintenant, notre priorité, et c'est les prochaines 6 ou 7 semaines, c'est très important de travailler avec chaque parti et de trouver des occasions de travailler ensemble. Mais maintenant, ça c'est notre priorité seulement.
Pour les prochains 3 ans, juste pour les prochaines 6-7 semaines.
Ouais, mais maintenant, il y a des priorités très importantes pour le Parlement et pour les 4 semaines. Et on va mettre notre focus sur ça seulement et on va parler avec toutes les autres parties sur ce sujet.
Are you open to a formal deal, though? Are you open to a formal deal?
Look, I appreciate speculation, but that's not what we're in the business of. We have an enormous amount to get through. We have a lot of conversations with the other parties of where that common ground is. We have to see how we're going to be working together over this period of time. That's where my focus is at this period of time.
Are your talks with the NDP different than your talks with the other parties?
I treat I think that every time you come into a new parliament, you start at zero, where you start at the opportunity to say, how can we work together and have those conversations with each parties. You don't shut any doors. Thanks so much.
Thanks for talking.
Monsieur Rodriguez, j'aimerais ça vous parler de...
C'est souhaitable.
Alors, écoutez, on a réussi, moi, je sais pas où on est le House Leader, mais moi, le temps que j'étais là, l'équipe, lorsqu'on a réussi à avoir différentes ententes avec l'un ou l'autre des partis, l'important, c'est qu'on puisse continuer à avoir l'appui des différents partis d'opposition pour faire avancer les choses qui sont très importantes.
Mais quelque chose d'informel, ça vous aide plus longtemps, ça, non?
Écoutez, moi, j'ai pas eu de discussion d'entente ou quoi que ce soit, mais encore une fois, j'espère que les partis de l'opposition vont embarquer avec nous parce qu'on a un mandat clair de la population pour faire avancer
donc pas juste
les intérêts. Écoutez, quand j'étais leader du gouvernement, ma philosophie était la même, main tendue à tout le monde, et parfois on a eu l'appui de l'un ou l'autre, et parfois l'unanimité. Mais les Canadiens s'attendent à ce qu'on bouge, puis on va bouger.
Mais êtes-vous ouvert à une entente formelle avec
Madame Joly, les tests PCR pour le retour au Canada, allez-vous enlever ça? Tous les gens disent que ça n'a pas de bon sens.
Bien, en fait, la Dr Tan, présentement, a dit qu'elle était intéressée à regarder cette situation-là. De notre côté, en tant que gouvernement, on va toujours se fier sur nos experts. Et en ce sens-là, on va attendre les recommandations.
Donc, il y a espoir?
On attend les recommandations.
Hey, Terry, can I just ask you, it's an in-person caucus meeting. How do you feel about being able to rub shoulders with your caucus colleagues first time in a long time?
It's great. It really does feel good to get together. Zooming was very effective. We've got a lot of things done Zooming. But, the certain in-person element will never, ever be replaced by Zoom. So I think going forward with Zoom, in person, especially in Northern Ontario, when the winter storms and such, we can easily replace meetings with Zoom. Overall, really excited. And so without further ado, we can go in there and have some fun.
What's your sense of the 7-week wait? Were you frustrated by the wait, or?
Oh, not at all. Not at all whatsoever. I think it was good. It was a good time to reconnect with the constituents. I'm re-elected for Sault Ste. and we continue to meet with our constituents, hear them. We heard a lot during the election, so now we have an opportunity to discuss what we heard and how to fit it into our agenda going forward.
And what kind of election debrief are you hoping to hear today?
Well, I'm very pleased. This is my third time winning. It's a record for Sault Ste. for a Liberal MP in a row. So I was pleased. We have a major minority government, so we can get things done. And the big thing I heard during the election is Canadians want things to get done. So we need to do a better job as all parliamentarians in committees and making sure that the filibustering and such does not happen, because look at the fall economic statement. They contain hundreds of millions of dollars, including tens of millions of dollars for Northern Ontario. And that was, in essence, slowed down for months and months and months and months. And that can't happen. So, thank you.
Thank you. Have fun.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Gerretsen, can I just ask you a few questions? The talk of the deal with the NDP, do you support there being some sort of working agreement with the NDP to...
I support any work that we can do with...
Step back a little bit for the camera? There.
I support any work that we can do with other parties. Quite frankly, I mean, that's how you function in a minority government. What that looks like structurally and formally is not as important to me as the fact that we know that we can work together, and we will do that.
But do you have any concerns about what it would, like the optics around a potential formal agreement? Like, would you like to be more ad hoc?
I think we work really well in the ad hoc fashion. If our leadership decides that something more formal is appropriate, I'm okay with that too.
And are you running for caucus chair?
I'm not.
You're not. Who is? I heard it's Brenda Shanahan, and who else?
I don't think that that's a really public process until somebody's elected, so I can't share.
All right, thank you. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on working formally with the NDP. Should it be a formal arrangement, or do you think the sort of ad hoc basis that you operate under in the last Parliament is better?
Look, we have a number of shared priorities, so I think I and every other member in that caucus room today are willing to work with whatever party wants to work together on the priorities that got us here. Whether that's a formalized arrangement sometime in the future, I haven't heard it discussed as of yet, except in the media. Whatever form it takes, we're here to work with people to get jobs done for Canadians.
So you guys haven't gotten any briefing on it yet?
Well, I'm not going to talk about what happens in that room, but in the conversations that I've been having with my constituents and with my colleagues, we're not yet talking about a formal arrangement. We're talking about the importance of working together with the other parties on those shared objectives, but nothing beyond that so far.
And personally, you don't have a preference for like a formal arrangement versus the sort of case by case?
Let's see how it goes. I think we have we all MPs from all parties come back to this House with a refreshed mandate, and a good part of that mandate is to work together and to get us through this pandemic and to figure out housing and climate change and a number of other things that we all know about. Let's see how that goes, and if it needs to be formalized into something more rigid, then we can think about that at that time.
Already the Conservative leader is talking about this as the evil Liberal NDP coalition. Don't you think if it becomes formal, then your criticism might be difficult to answer?
It's hard for me to respond to anything that the Conservative leader would say about this. That's a leader who is famous for not working together with people. So our focus is going to be on working with any member in the House who does want to work with us to get things done. Again, whether that's informal, ad hoc, or rigid, I think we just start with let's try to work together as colleagues in the House that the Canadians sent us to work in.
But that name coalition has been, described as something from hell or whatever by Conservatives not so long ago. So isn't it complicated for you to go down that path?
Look, we'll cross that bridge if we come to it, okay? I think right now we're just going to work together on the shared priorities, and that has, in my time in this House, 6 years, working with colleagues from all parties has stood me in good stead and stood our government in good stead, and I'm going to continue to work in that way.
Does working with the NDP mean billions in new spending? That's what the Conservatives are saying, that any deals or working or cooperating with the NDP means billions in more debt. I
can't speak to anything that people are saying. I haven't heard this comment, but I'm focused on our agenda and on our platform commitments, and I'm looking forward to the throne speech that will solidify what will be in the mandate letters, and then we can all get to work and deliver.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Minister Miller, is there going to be any federal support for the search going on Capel Residential School right now? There's a search going on right now, sir. So what's happening from a federal perspective in terms of aid or fellow?
Absolutely.
I have discussions right now with the Starblanket First Nation. So right now they're looking. Obviously, it's going to be a difficult time for the community.
Yes.
What's the federal government doing to support?
So if you'll recall, in May, after the rediscoveries in Kamloops, as well as the one in Caucus, the Prime Minister announced $320 million of support for a number of things. Not only simply searches, which relatively speaking are less expensive than the longer-term solutions, which are supports in mental health, supports for destruction and rebuilding in some communities, as well as communities that are starting the community consultations as to how to proceed. A number of these communities were the center point for other communities having children taken away from them. So they have to then in turn consult elders and survivors, some of whom are still suffering in silence about what to do. And they are very difficult conversations. So what we have seen and has been publicly reported in Kamloops, for example, is the product of years of work. And obviously what we've heard loud and clear from Canadians, Indigenous peoples, is that this work has to be accelerated. So that $320 million is there, as well as the funds that were allocated in budget 2019. And it's for basically a three-pronged approach for searches, supports in mental health, as well as building, tearing down, and rebuilding in some cases. A lot of these are in their infancy. There's no doubt, there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that more atrocities and discoveries will come to light, and we should brace for them, as difficult as that is.
What about records? That's a big aspect.
Absolutely.
But so what's happening in terms of getting more records to try and track down, where these
bodies, children came from, how you can get them back to their families in terms of knowing what happened.
Absolutely, and I think it's sad to say, but the entirety of the truth will probably never be known. The tip of the iceberg that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission exposed was just that, the tip of the iceberg. There is work to be done in terms of getting to the more truth that's out there, whether that's records that are sitting in provincial entities, whether that's records that are still sitting with the appropriate church authorities, or records within the federal government. And that's work that we're willing to do, first and foremost with the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. I had a talk with their executive director over the last week around flags, but also around the work we can do in making sure that the records that they feel they need, and at least what we're doing inside of government to go through a thorough search of what it actually is known within the government. A great deal of them have been turned over.
Is there a federal commitment to release all records that have to be released?
There is, absolutely, but there's some delicacy with that, you know, in and around confidentiality of the independent assessment process, which revealed horrors where people had to come forward and talk about the trauma that they suffered. They are entitled to that. The victims themselves are entitled to that confidentiality. It doesn't mean that that's an absolute bar to triangulating information and working with the appropriate the National Centre for Reconciliation and triangulating a pattern of evidence that can be anonymized, but that's work that is it's very painstaking, but it doesn't come without lack of effort from the Government of Canada.
What does that have to do with the records from the schools themselves, though? I mean, those are more recent records. They're asking for the records from the schools themselves.
Sure, and that's work, whether it's a school that was run by the Canadian government or run by the Catholic Church, we can act as a facilitator to push and advocate to get more of those records out. When it comes to Kamloops itself, the Oblates have, according to what I've been told, turned over that evidence. But again, there's lack of trust here as well. I think that's evident from your reporting and from what we're hearing, and we have to provide those assurances, as difficult as it is for people that we are working with in good faith with them, not only to look at the satisfaction of the evidence that's been turned over, but what may still reside within these nooks and crannies of the federal government.
But how do we not know what records are?
Pardon me?
How do we not know what records we have at this point? I mean, these are things that the federal government should have been looking for years.
Well, yes and no, absolutely. And the ones that were produced as part of the record and document production process for the reports in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is one of them, and that is a cohesive body of evidence that has been turned over. But there's also the records from the independent assessment process, which details a lot of traumatic events, and there's an ongoing discussion as there's a Supreme Court judgment on it as to whether those should be destroyed by a certain date. There's obviously a pause on that right now, but clearly there's more work to be done to being able to assess what exactly happened, when, where, and how. And ultimately, as part of that search for truth and the pain that comes from that, accountability, and I think that's the next step where we're all sort of reckoning as a country. But again, foremost, it should be in the top of people's minds that the federal government was complicit in this, the churches were complicit in this, and so we do have to have that level of accountability, working with the communities and making sure that we are working with them and according to their wishes and not sort of coming in there with heavy-handedly. So that it'll be difficult, but it's one I think Canadians want to hear more about.
Just briefly on Indigenous Remembrance Day, I just wanted to get your thoughts. You just later released, I believe.
Yeah, sure. In front of the Memorial for Indigenous Veterans, a number of members of Caucus followed us, and a number of ministers Bennett, O'Regan, Vandal, and Anand, just to collect ourselves. There was a ceremony going on there led by some elders, so we were very careful not to disturb the respects they were paying to the fallen. But just a moment, sort of privately, to gather our thoughts on this important day, and it shouldn't be lost in people's minds how veterans were treated. That Indigenous veterans were treated. They served in disproportionate amounts, ready to lay down their lives. It destroyed families as a result of those deaths, and they weren't treated well when they got back compared to non-Indigenous veterans. So that day is dedicated to them and to their memories, as well as we honor their service and need to continue to honor their service. That pain is ongoing, so while we recognize them as well on the 11th of November, this is a particular day where it is important to honor them, and there's a memorial to them, so that was the best place to do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks. An update on what's going on with the operations in Tigray to get Canadian diplomatic family and so on out. Who is coming out of Tigray? Why?
Well, obviously, we're concerned with what's going on in Ethiopia. I had the chance to talk with the ambassador over the weekend, as well as the African Union President, Mr. Faki, President Faki, this morning. We call on us for a ceasefire on the part of all parties. And at the same time, we wanted to make sure that for security reasons, non-essential staff would be withdrawn, but at the same time we'll be there for Canadians that are in Ethiopia. And to answer specifically your question, I would say the most important thing is for any Canadian in Ethiopia right now, please go and register on the Global Affairs website. It is important for us through our embassies and mission to know where you are, to make sure that we can help you out.
Is there any change of advice for Canadians in Ethiopia now?
Well, we always have to look at the travel advisory. It is always important to follow what is written online. But that being said, our hearts are with Ethiopians and obviously also with Canadians that have loved ones in Ethiopia.
What's the comment on the human rights abuses that we're seeing there? What's Canada's position on what's being reported out of there? Well,
Canada worked with the UN as well as with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission in order to gather more information regarding what was going on in the region. That report was released recently, and in that report there are clear questions regarding human rights infringements. And in that sense, we are very concerned with what's going on, and that's why we're really calling for a peaceful solution, and that starts with a ceasefire.
Can we get your thoughts on the idea of a coalition or agreement with the NDP to keep the government going?
Well, obviously, we want to work with all parties. We're a minority government. What we clearly heard in the last elections is Canadians are really expecting us to make this work. And in that sense, personally, I had the chance to talk with my critique from the Bloc Québécois. I'll do so with the NDP as well as with the Conservatives. And the Prime Minister has met with all the leaders of the oppositions. And in that sense, want to make sure that starting November 22nd, we can continue to deliver for Canadians.
Do you need a formal agreement to make it work more smoothly than it did in the last Parliament?
We need to make it work, and we'll find different ways to make that work. Donc, est-ce qu'on parle d'une entente formelle ou du long terme? C'est essentiellement ça notre question. C'est que la dernière fois aussi, vous avez discuté avec les partis au cas par cas. Est-ce que cette fois-ci, vous voudriez que ce soit une entente formelle et plus large qui engloberait
Mais je pense que le plus important à ce stade-ci, c'est peu importe la méthode, c'est qu'on puisse être capable de garder la confiance des citoyens dans ce qu'on fait. On est en sortie de pandémie et en ce sens-là, les gens s'attendent à ce que leur gouvernement soit là pour les aider à livrer des résultats concrets. Mais au-delà de ça, je pense qu'ils s'attendent à ce qu'ils entendent moins parler de politique et plus de résultats.
Et sur les jeunes, savez-vous combien de Canadiens là-bas?
Nous savons qu'il y a plus de 1500 personnes qui sont enregistrées présentement auprès de l'ambassade à Addis Abeba, mais bien entendu, nos données sont toujours basées sur le nombre de personnes qui sont inscrites plutôt que sur la réalité terrain, parce que c'est vraiment basé sur...
Pas encore d'un effort pour les aider à sortir de là.
Mais là, présentement, ce qu'on leur dit, c'est premièrement de s'enregistrer et deuxièmement, c'est important de penser à ce qui se passe. Dans le fond, il y a quand même des grands enjeux de sécurité sur place et c'est pas pour rien que le Canada a pris la décision de retirer son personnel qui n'est pas essentiel pour le moment. Yes, last question.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Are there any discussions in Canada sending humanitarian aid to Ethiopia?
Well, obviously, we've been doing that. Ethiopia is part of the 10 countries that get the most in terms of humanitarian aid. Sorry. Can I say that again?
Of course.
Okay. So it's my accent. So Ethiopia is part of the 10 countries that get the most humanitarian aid in the region, and that's why it is clearly important for us to make sure that that aid gets to the people, to Ethiopians themselves that are at at the core of this conflict. And because we know that there is allegation of human rights violation, it is even more important in that context.
Is Canada playing any role in negotiating the ceasefire thing?
How long will Canadians have to take a PCR test to come back to Canada? What's the prognosis on that?
Well, first thing I would say is we're very happy to see the news that the border is now reopened, subject to all of the necessary proof of vaccination protocols on both sides, and the early reports are that the volumes seem to be managed well, which is good. I know that this has been a long time coming, but the health protocols that we have put in place have served certainly Canadians well by maintaining the necessary measures to reduce the potential risk of the spread of the virus. It's important to underscore that we're not completely out of the pandemic yet, that the measures that we put in place are intended to protect the health and safety of Canadians.
But some of those measures, like if you're going to the United States for less than 72 hours, you're getting your test in Canada. How does that make sense?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, and this has been a hallmark throughout the pandemic, we've always followed the advice of our healthcare experts, and by and large, they have worked very effectively. And I think, given the stage that we're at right now in the pandemic, it's important that we continue to follow that advice. Today is an important milestone. Today is a milestone wherein we'll see Canadians and Americans be able to travel back and forth with a little bit more frequency, but following the same advice that we followed all along.
But what science proves that the PCR test in Canada tells you anything about exposure in the U.S.?
Well, it is a measure. It is a measure that is
exposure in Canada, right?
It's
Not in the U.S. You're not arguing that it's a measure of exposure in the U.S., are you?
Well, no, I would never argue with the advice that has been given by our healthcare experts that is designed to help mitigate the potential risk of exposure. So it is an effective measure, and we will continue to follow the advice from our healthcare experts. Okay, one at a time. I'm trying to answer you all one at a time.
Well, you guys running away so fast. So.
See, here I am. I'm not going anywhere.
There you are.
Yay. Experts are now saying for shorter trips it might not actually be a smart or useful thing. So are you going to look at the idea of getting rid of it for short trips?
Well, we'll listen to the healthcare experts that work for the Public Health Agency of Canada, as we have done throughout. And as I have said, that those measures have been very effective at managing the risk of the spread of the virus at the border. Should that advice change, we will accept that advice when it comes. But right now, I think the good news is that we are at a stage where we are starting to see more travel between Canada and the United States, and we're seeing it done incrementally, responsibly, and at all times following the advice of our health
Minister, isn't this creating a bit of a disparity, though, between those who can afford to travel and those that can't afford to get a PCR test to come back to Canada? Because there are a lot of, low-income families that have to get 3 or 4 different tests. Why not the rapid test to come back?
It's a fair question, and we've done everything that we can to ensure that there are COVID benefits for families who need it the most. And this is a government that has had the backs of Canadians, and particularly those Canadians who are, working extremely hard. We've had the backs of small businesses as well to provide them with supports when it comes to rent relief and wage subsidies, and all of those supports have been designed to help Canadians get through this pandemic. We've made tremendous progress to this point. We are among the highest rate of vaccinated countries in the world. And that is because we have followed the advice of our healthcare experts. That is because we have continued to say that the best way to get over the pandemic is to continue to get as many Canadians vaccinated as possible. And that logic applies at the border as well.
But just to follow up, what do you say to that family that says, okay, these folks can travel because they can afford it. I want to go on vacation, or I want to go on a trip as well, and the government is making it cost prohibitive in order for me to do that.
I would say that we'll continue to be there for hard-working Canadians. Whether you're, at the beginning stage of your life and you're trying to get an education, whether you're a young family trying to buy that first home, or trying to get access to affordable health care, whether you're, a Canadian that is towards the end of their career and at the, that point where they're retiring, we're looking at a variety of ways to support Canadians with financial supports. We were there throughout the pandemic, and we're going to continue to be there post-pandemic. Thanks very much.
What happens if you're an MP and you decide that you want to, take the government to court because you don't want to get vaccinated and come to work? As Labor Minister, how does that fit in?
Where are MPs registered? If I'm an MP and I say I want to get vaccinated, so I'm not. You can't force me as my workplace. So is this where this is going to go to? We're hearing this from the Conservative Party right now. They're having this big debate about who is and who isn't vaccinated, and whether they should have to give it the private information and come and work at the House of Commons.
My mandate, Labour Minister now, is to implement vaccinations for the federal public service and for federally regulated industries. And I can tell you that, even during the course of the campaign, I think it was by far one of the most popular parts of our mandate, of our campaign commitments. And we won. So I got to implement it.
And what about MPs, though? What if they choose not to get vaccinated?
Fail to see how MPs are any exception to that rule.
And in terms of federally regulated sectors, how are you going to do that? Are you going to do that by legislation? Are you, the telecoms and et cetera, how are you going to do it?
Marine.
Yeah, all those.
In the process of doing that now, just a broad-based consultation. I'm in, week 2 now of a 3-week cross-Canada tour, talking to employers and to employees about how we're going to do that, but fairly emphatic about what we need to do. There's no question.
Does it require legislation, or does it be done by regulation, or how do you see that happening?
We're exploring all that now. I'm going to have a lot more to say about this in just a short while, guys, but not at the moment.
Should the government make a deal with the NDP to prolong your time?
Oh gosh, I'm not even going to get into that, but
why not?
because I'm into it. I'm talking about vaccination mandates, but I will be talking a lot more about this.
Do you see any upside in having stability guaranteed for this Parliament?
Oh, listen, I'm not going to get too far over my skis. I think we're talking about a lot of stuff in there right now.
What's your personal opinion?
Mr. Holland, virtual sittings, is there any sort of agreement with the deal, especially with certain Conservative MPs where it's uncertain they may enter the House because of the vaccination?
Well, look, we don't know how many Conservative MPs might not be vaccinated, and certainly we're in a period of time where we're still in a global pandemic. We don't know exactly where that's going to go, so I think it's incredibly important to continue the hybrid provisions that we have for the House. We're having discussions with I'm having with my counterparts and the other parties, and it's my hope, as we've been able to find common ground in other areas throughout the pandemic, that we can here too. It's just logical. It makes good sense.
There was one Liberal who had a medical exemption. Is that still the case?
Basically, the rules are very clear, as we've outlined in the BOY. What constitutes a medical exemption is clearly spelled out, and it represents a great rarity. We're making sure that anybody who comes into the House is either fully vaccinated or meets that very narrow criteria of what is a medical exemption. I'll have to get back to you on that one, just to be...
Did all your caucus members show up in person, or did you do a national?
We did a hybrid caucus today. Well, it was not, as you would know, a hybrid. Your attendance is, there's no not showing up. Everybody came. But, in terms of how many numbers, obviously. Obviously, I can't talk about the internal machinations of caucus.
Est-ce que vous allez avoir beaucoup de ministres en chambre ou ça va être un ministre, 2 ministres par jour? Parce qu'il va y avoir quand même un intérêt à ce qu'il y ait beaucoup de libéraux, plus que la dernière session.
Oui, on peut avoir une discussion combien de ministres va être aux chambres ou quelque chose comme ça, mais la chose plus importante est de continuer le Parlement hybride, et après ça, on peut avoir une discussion avec les autres partis, combien de députés aux chambres, combien de ministres. C'est trop tôt pour ça maintenant.
Le premier jour, le 22 novembre, expliquez-moi, est-ce que ça va déjà être hybride au premier jour pour le choix du président, ou est-ce que seulement les gens en personne pourront voter et choisir le président?
Oui, la situation actuelle, c'est le Parlement en personne, parce qu'on a besoin de l'unanimité de continuer les parlements hybrides. Alors, on cherche pour ça maintenant, mais la situation actuelle... Non, c'est clair, c'est pour les premiers jours. C'est pas une parlement hybride pour les premiers jours.
Donc, forcément, pour choisir un président, il va falloir que les députés soient là pour voter pour
en personne, parce que maintenant, c'est pas l'unanimité.
Yeah, but you also only need 4. You don't need 338, you could have 20.
Well, there are, as we've looked in other instances, there were other ways of dealing with that, and those are the discussions that we're going to have. But I mean, those are discussions that are ongoing. That would not be hybrid, though. Like what we did before we were able to move to the hybrid measures, we had reduced numbers. But I mean, look, the reality is we have to have these discussions. They're premature right now. The provisions on the first day are that this will be an in-person sitting
So
when
on
we
the
turn the
first
first day.
day, you have to be there to elect the speaker.
Correct.
If you're not there, you're not voting for a speaker.
That is as it stands. Right now, and it would have to. And the only thing that could change that would be unanimity. And I remain hopeful as I talk with the other parties that we can get to a point of consensus. But in absence of unanimity, that would be what.
Is there any update on what's going on with negotiations with the NDP?
Sorry, repeat
Do you have
that.
any update on what's happening with any negotiations with the NDP?
Look, we're talking with each and every one of the parties about our common agendas and what we can get done for Canadians. And the Prime Minister has had conversations with his counterparts and other parties. I'm doing the same for myself. We have a very aggressive agenda to get to in the next coming weeks, and that's what we're focused on this time.
But the former coalition on the table?
It's clear that there might be more synergies with the NDP than other parties. That's according to some of your colleagues today. So why not give some type of an update?
Let's be really clear. When we're taking a look at the first things that we're going to be dealing with is the extension of COVID benefits. And we want to have discussions with all parties around how we can extend those benefits so that we're there for Canadians. Right now, we want to make sure that medical sites, that we don't see what we happened before, where healthcare professionals who are trying to be on the front lines of this battle are dealing with protesters and being menaced by that. I think there's a lot of areas of common ground. I don't care what political stripe you come from. Canadians want these measures dealt with, and we're going to work with all the other parties.
Is a formal coalition on the table?
I'll take one last. I'll take it. Sorry.
What do you think about the Conservatives not wanting to disclose their vaccination status?
Look, here's my perspective. During COVID, we had the Conservatives saying they were totally against the hybrid model. They said they were against using digital to vote. And we had good conversations. They came around to reasonable positions. And when I go and I speak to Canadians of all different political backgrounds, they understand when you walk into a restaurant on the other side of the road here that you got to be vaccinated. It's just plain common logic, plain common sense. It's my hope that will prevail. Thanks so much.
Sure. Yeah, you go. Nobody here. Can you? Oh, here's Harrison.
Step over here, please.
What do you make of the decision when it comes not to flying the Every Child Matters flag on Parliament Hill as the AFN has asked?
Well, I think that we have the flag, and that was commissioned and was delivered to the National Centre on Truth and Reconciliation. There are rules about what flags can fly. It's like we had to get the rules changed in order to get the famous 5 statue on the hill because the rule was then only dead prime ministers. So, there are protocols, and we would hope that we can get it on 100 Wellington, but we will have to just take our time and do the right thing.
Madame Bennett, quand vous êtes entrée au caucus, vous avez dit on va discuter de l'entente avec le NPD. Comment ça s'est passé? Est-ce que vous êtes plus près d'une entente, d'avoir un deal sur la façon de...
Caucus is caucus.
You don't want to talk about it?
Caucus is caucus.
Do you think that Parliament should come back in a hybrid format?
Yes.
Why?
It's about family friendly. It's about when you think of Judy Foote and her breast cancer, the fact that she was the whip and ended up not being able to vote. I think there are lots of reasons that even while committees are traveling, for them to be able to vote while the committee is traveling, I think the hybrid, we've learned a lot through the hybrid process, and I think it really allows the flexibility for parliamentarians to do their job in their riding when they have to be there and not miss a vote. Votes in minority governments can happen at any time, and I think it's really important.
So you think it should be permanent, not just for the duration of the pandemic?
That's my opinion. My first year in Parliament, my mother was in the hospital for 7 months, 2 months in the ICU on a respirator. It's not just for families or parliamentarians with children. This is what happens, and but I also remember, being on the custody and divorce joint committee and having to fly back for a vote, and it meant that we weren't there to hear the witnesses or the committee. So I think it's not only, it allows parliamentarians to do their full job.
What do you make of the fact that the Conservatives have formed this mini caucus of about 15 to 30 people to discuss, amongst other things, the efficacy of vaccines? What do you think that says about some portions of that party?
Well, they can form a caucus to discuss civil rights, civil liberties, whatever, if they want. On the issue of vaccines, they're on the wrong side of history. This is where Canadians are. Our rights are not to infringe on other people's rights. So that it means that if we wear a mask, it only protects others from us. We're not protected from others. And so I think it is about fully vaxxed people wearing masks, setting an example for the country.
Can I just double check on the flag again? So there's work underway to try and get it on 100 Wellington, but I just want to understand what you're saying.
I think there was certainly that there is work to find a place, a spot where it could be. Maybe at half-mast till every child is found. But I think we want to find a way to have some sort of acknowledgement of really what the survivors and what the family members are saying. But the fact that every September 30th, for going forward, that flag in all government buildings will come down to half-mast every single September 30th, and that I think is a recognition of how serious the government, but Canadians feel this important step in reconciliation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot with healthcare workers from protests and abuse around vaccinations, things like that. Do you see that being done through actual new legislation, or are you planning for that?
Well, it's certainly something we promised in our platform, and we're looking at the alternatives to making that a reality. I'm not going to disclose what we're discussing right now, what we're thinking about, but it is in our platform, and we do intend to do it.
Does it have to be new legislation, or can it?
Again, we're looking at all our options. We did promise it in our platform, and we do intend to do it.
Promise legislation, actually? I thought the platform actually promised legislation.
Yeah, but we're looking.
So you're not saying, you're not dialing that back. You're not saying
I'm
we might not do
I'm not dialing that.
legislation.
I am not dialing that back at all. Okay.
Can I just, I know you can't speak to the nature of the talks because they're confidential and more led by, I'm talking about the Indigenous child welfare case,
Right.
but how hopeful, can you just give us any type of update? Like, are the talks happening? Are you hopeful there could be a resolution by the end of the year?
Well, we have given ourselves the end of the year as our deadline, and I'm optimistic that we can make it work.
What makes you optimistic?
Well, we have, I think, come back with an offer, as we said at the opening press conference. We've come back with an initial offer that is significant enough to bring everybody to the table, and everybody is at the table, and so for that reason, I'm optimistic.
Daily, like, is this happening? I know.
I won't go into
Okay.
the modalities of it.
Thank
The
you.
negotiations are confidential.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Parce qu'il ne l'avait pas demandé originalement.
About the update about getting Afghans out of places like Afghanistan and Qatar, what is taking so long and what is the plan?
So I want to be careful because not every individual that we're talking about is in the same set of circumstances. I'll remind that there are about 3,200 that have come to Canada. I think we're dealing with about 1,200 now that have been approved that are at some transit point. Some of the people who are awaiting their time to come to Canada might be at a stage where they need to go through the ordinary security screening process. Others we may need to wait on to be referred to us by a third-party referral organization. So the time is going to take for those who are in third countries right now to get here really just depends on where they're at in the process. We are working with the different partner countries on the ground that surround the region, and we're working with the partner organizations we have to help facilitate this process. The work has started already, and I've seen in the first 2 weeks I've been in this new role that I do expect things to be moving, and I just urge, while we're sorting some final things out in the weeks ahead, a little bit of patience, because I do think we are going to start to see movement with some of these groups that are in third countries.
Mr. Fraser,
Are we really going to see things ramp up? The goal is what, 40,000, right? And you mentioned 3,200. So how do we get to 40,000 and with what speed?
Well, look, I don't want to put a calendar on it because there's certain decisions that I think we need to take as a government, and there's certain conversations we need to have to facilitate the transport. We need to determine how many can be actually privately sponsored with groups here in Canada. So there's a lot of moving pieces of this, and I apologize for the lack of specific detail. But right now, I've got confidence that we are going to have arrangements with these that are in third countries now, because I do see that uptick in support within Canada's borders for people that want to sponsor families. I do see that compassion coming out that we are known for internationally, and I do see partners on the ground and right through the global community, frankly, who are interested in seeing this effort succeed, not just in Canada, but around the world. And I do see quite a number of these people who actually have a connection to Canada that want to be here and who people want to have come here. So the ingredients are in place for a successful effort to resettle these some of the world's most vulnerable people who have been through something most Canadians can never appreciate. And I really look forward to taking on this new responsibility to help them find a home.
What about those who are still in Afghanistan?
You said a couple of weeks ago that Canada has a moral responsibility, you believe, to help the people who helped Canada. How does that square with the government's decision not to keep funding the safe houses for the Afghans who are still stuck there?
So look, I do believe firmly that Canada does have a moral obligation to help those who've helped us in our time of need. I headed a really important meeting from my perspective with the Veterans Transition Network, who is helping with the Safe House effort most recently. What I've learned, though, over the course of the last couple of weeks is that the choke point is not just keeping people in safe houses for an indefinite period of time. Right now, we need to find a way to actually get them out of Afghanistan. And one of the things I find incredibly challenging and that I hope Canadians can reflect upon. This is not the same as the effort in Syria, where we had a centrally managed and fairly well-organized effort to screen people, to have them ready for travel. We're dealing with a country that's under the control of the Taliban. We're dealing with people who don't know how to run an airport professionally. We're dealing with third parties that we're trying to partner with who potentially have better relationships with people on the ground to set up flights. Within the group that some of these organizations were working to keep safe in Afghanistan, there were hundreds who were approved to Canada, but still no logistical way to get them out. I can't tell you how important these conversations were. I hesitate to mention who said what and what I think they would appreciate as a private meeting. But the personal stories of what they've been through demonstrate to me that we want to achieve the same thing and get some of the most vulnerable people here who helped Canada to their new home.
But wouldn't part of that effort require you to try and provide them safety while they're still there trying to get out? I don't understand that.
Sure. Well, there was a partnership with Global Affairs Canada and the Veterans Transition Network, including the provision of funding. The focus of my conversation wasn't about the funding that needs to come. I think they know that the department that I'm responsible for is more focused on the processing of people, making sure that we have the ability to do appropriate security screening, making sure that we can find referral partners to help some of these people get out. I'm willing to continue to meet with this group to discuss whatever their priorities may be, but in terms of our commitment to the shared mission of helping the people who've helped us and getting them to Canada, it's something that I think we all want to see.
Last question.
Thank you.
Well, that's it.
You're going to shut it down.
And look, thanks very much, everyone. I expect it won't be the last time we chat.
Thank you.